This is the story of Okafor, a man swallowed by a snake because his greed grew taller than the tallest palm tree. A man who thought he could bury his sins beneath the soil but didn't know that justice slithers where eyes cannot see, and sometimes it comes wrapped in the coils of a giant snake. Stay with me, because this tale will chill you to your bones, and you will learn that no betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, ever goes unpunished. A long time ago, in the quiet village of Eziaka, life moved slowly, in rhythm with the rising sun and the soft sigh of the wind through the palm trees. Villagers rose before dawn, carrying baskets, hoes, and pots, their bare feet pressing into the red soil that smelled of earth and rain. In this village lived a man named Okafor. His name was whispered with reverence and envy alike. He was a trader unlike any other, known for his booming yam business that stretched far beyond the village and into the surrounding towns. His farmlands were vast, so expansive that travelers often joked they could not see the edges until they reached the horizon. On market days, the roads leading into Eziaka swarmed with people eager to sell and buy, and there he would be, Okafor, standing tall, chest puffed, eyes sharp like a hawk, surveying every transaction, every handshake, every coin exchanged. He had 2 wives, many children, and servants who moved at his command. The compound was enormous, long walls of clay and straw, paths lined with palm fronds, huts for wives, rooms for workers, and a storehouse stacked with yams that shone like gold in the sun. Every corner of the place smelled of roasted yams, smoke from cooking fires, and the faint sweetness of palm oil boiling in iron pots. On the surface, he was a man admired for his wealth and success, and even the village chief would nod with respect whenever Okafor passed. But beneath the polished shoes and fine cloth, beneath the sharp smile and firm handshake, lurked a heart darker than the shadows that stretched across his compound at sunset. Greed had eaten him alive. It whispered in his ears every morning, every market day, and it grew with every coin he collected, every man he outwitted, every woman he persuaded, and every worker he underpaid. Greed had become a hunger that nothing could satisfy. Across the village, in a smaller, quieter part where the palm trees grew close together and the paths were soft underfoot, lived Ifeanyi. He was a palm wine tapper, known for his honesty and simple heart. Every morning, before the roosters crowed, he climbed the tallest palms, swinging with the ease of one born to the trees, collecting the sweet wine that dripped from the cut fronds. His family, his wife, little son, and younger sister depended on him, but they were not rich. They had only enough to live with dignity and enough to be happy. Ifeanyi never wanted for more than that. When he walked to the market with his jerry cans of fresh palm wine, he carried them with the care of a man protecting treasures, but he smiled freely, laughed easily, and greeted neighbors by name. His stall was small, modest, and always neat. When someone complained about the taste or the price, he apologized, offered a fresh sample, and sometimes even refused payment if he felt the buyer could not afford it. People trusted him, not because they feared him, but because his honesty was as tangible as the aroma of fresh wine on a hot day. And this simple trust, this calm presence, would eventually sow the seeds of envy in a heart that knew only hunger and ambition. Okafor noticed Ifeanyi. At first it was mere recognition. He bought palm wine occasionally, nodding politely, exchanging the standard greetings. But over time, Okafor began to pay closer attention. He observed how neatly Ifeanyi stacked his cans, how he smiled at customers, how children lingered around him without fear, how his wife moved quietly beside him, and how the younger sister watched over the stall like a guardian. Every detail stirred something in Okafor, not admiration, not friendship, but an ache, sharp and insidious, that he would not name aloud. He began inviting Ifeanyi to his compound after the market closed, offering food and palm wine, sitting together under the mango trees while the orange sun dipped behind the hills. Ifeanyi spoke freely, telling of his small profits, his plans to plant more palms next year, his hope that the farm would grow just enough to keep them safe. He laughed with his wife and son, his voice carrying the ease of a man who had no need to hoard wealth, no need to fear, no need to dominate. Okafor listened in silence, his teeth biting the inside of his cheek, his mind calculating, his eyes narrowing at the happiness he could not touch. What Ifeanyi had, he thought, was what he wanted, peace. And peace was poison to a man who lived only for more, for larger, for power that could never be filled. Every shared meal, every open word, every honest laugh became a stone laid on the foundation of Okafor's envy, a wall that grew taller each night in the darkness of his mind. Then one evening, something changed. Ifeanyi came with his little family, carrying the same modest basket of food they always brought to show gratitude. The children ran ahead, laughing, chasing each other through the tall grasses of the compound. His wife smiled politely, curtsying slightly when she met Okafor's gaze. They ate together on the clay floor, chopping yam, dipping in palm oil, talking of nothing more than weather, crops, and the small pleasures of village life. But Okafor's heart, already heavy with hunger, shifted into a dangerous rhythm.
Each bite Ifeanyi took, each laugh that reached the evening sky was a blow. It was not fairness or justice that stirred him now, but something older, darker, a craving that whispered the deadliest of thoughts. Ifeanyi's success, his honesty, his simple happiness, it could not stand. It could not remain. In the flickering light of the oil lamp, as the wind whispered through the palm fronds, and the children's laughter echoed faintly, Okafor made a decision that would change everything. It was a decision that would stain the soil of Eziaka, awaken the spirits that watched in the shadows, and set the stage for a justice far older and far greater than any man could imagine. He would take Ifeanyi's wealth, his life, his family's security, and he would do it quietly, carefully, as if burying the sun itself beneath the earth. He did not know then that the earth remembers, that the spirits do not forgive, and that nothing, not even a man's greed, ever truly escapes the reckoning that waits in silence, watching.
The following week, the sun rose in Eziaka as if nothing had changed. Birds sang, the wind rustled through the palms, and the red earth waited to be pressed by bare feet. Ifeanyi, unaware of the shadow that now followed him, set out early as usual, his jerry can swinging gently in rhythm with his steps. He hummed a soft tune, a melody his father had taught him, and felt the warmth of morning on his face. His little son ran alongside him for a short stretch, laughing, before being called back home by his mother. The village seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, as if nature itself held its breath, knowing a storm was coming. Okafor, in his compound, had prepared carefully. That night he had met secretly with two men who owed him loyalty, men whose hands were as calloused as the soil and whose hearts were easily swayed by gold. He whispered his plan to them like a priest muttering a curse. "Find him on the path to the market," he said. "Take everything. Make sure he never returns home alive. Leave no trace but the earth itself." Their eyes glimmered, a mixture of fear and greed, and they nodded. Gold would change everything for them, they thought. But neither of them knew what stirred quietly beneath the soil, nor the ancient justice that lingered like a storm waiting to strike. As Ifeanyi began his journey home that afternoon, the path that cut through the thick bush seemed darker than usual, the shadows of trees long and twisting like fingers. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind felt hesitant, brushing against his skin as if warning him to turn back. But Ifeanyi, ever trusting, ever hopeful, pressed forward, unaware that danger crouched just beyond the next curve. The two men lay in wait, hidden by the brush, their spears sharpened and their hearts hardened by gold. When Ifeanyi appeared, laughing softly to himself, they pounced with sudden violence. He struggled, fists flailing, feet kicking against the dry earth. He screamed, but the forest swallowed his cries. They struck him down, taking everything he had earned that day, dragging him toward a shallow depression beneath a fallen tree. The sun dipped slowly behind the hills, casting long shadows over the crime, and in the quiet that followed, only the whispers of the forest remained. By the next day, Ifeanyi did not return. His wife's worry grew into panic, and his son cried himself to sleep, clinging to the wrapper his mother pressed against his face. Villagers began to notice, calling out his name as they walked along the paths, searching under the tall palms and through the thick grass. The first 2 days passed with no word, and then the third, when she, his wife, went straight to Okafor's compound, her heart heavy with dread. She found him sitting under the mango tree, pretending concern, his voice loud and filled with fake urgency. "Where is he?" she asked, panic in her eyes. "I don't know," he said. "I haven't seen him since market. Let's search together." They joined the villagers, the group spreading into the bush, calling his name into the silence. When at last the disturbed soil revealed the shallow grave beneath the fallen tree, a cry erupted, a cry of grief so raw it seemed to shake the ground. They dug, and there lay Ifeanyi, lifeless. His hands clutched at the earth as if it had betrayed him. His skin was pale beneath the sun, eyes closed, his small body twisted in the final moments of struggle. The village wept. His wife's screams tore through the air, echoing from the clay walls of homes and across the red fields. His son's sobs were endless, a sound that no lullaby could soothe. His sister fainted when she saw the lifeless body, her voice silent for hours. The mourning was heavy and unyielding, covering the earth like a wet cloth. But in the depth of grief, a presence awoke. Something older than man stirred in the shadows, a justice as old as the forests themselves. It began with the two men who had struck him down. The first fell ill the following night. His skin swelled, cracked, and hardened like clay baking under the relentless sun. He screamed, clawed at the walls, and begged for mercy that did not come. Within days he was gone. The second man claimed he was watched by a giant black snake that slithered invisibly along his hut. His nights became torment. He spoke to himself, raving, until the villagers eventually found him dead, his eyes wide, his body cold. Whispers began to spread in the village, stories of Ifeanyi's spirit, of the earth itself seeking vengeance. Fear took root, and even Okafor, who had once laughed at such tales, felt an unease curling around his heart like a tightening rope. Okafor awoke that morning sweating, his sheets sticking to his skin as if warning him that sleep had failed to shield him from the shadows. The village was quiet, unnaturally quiet, as if every bird and insect had stopped to listen. He rose from his bed, trying to shake the feeling of eyes upon him, but the unease clung like wet clay to his shoulders. His servants went about their chores, glancing nervously toward him, whispering among themselves about the strange deaths of the two men who had helped Ifeanyi. "It's the curse," one muttered, shaking his head. Okafor waved them away with a forced laugh, but even as he did, a shiver ran down his spine, cold and sharp, as if invisible teeth had grazed the base of his neck. By mid-morning, Okafor had convinced himself it was just fear. Fear he had nurtured by imagining punishment that might never come. He walked to the market, intent on showing his wealth, arranging his yams in neat pyramids as though the symmetry could protect him. But the crowd seemed different that day. Whispers followed him wherever he went. Mothers drew their children closer. Friends avoided his eyes. And then he saw it, a shadow moving among the stalls, impossible in its size and form. It flickered, barely visible, coiling around a basket of yams before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Okafor laughed nervously, but his hand shook. Something in the air smelled of damp earth and decay, a scent that made his stomach twist. That night he returned to his compound, convinced that the day's strange occurrences were mere imagination. But sleep would not come. In the deep hours, a rustle sounded from the corner of the compound. At first he thought it was a stray animal, but then the sound grew, a low hiss that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Heart hammering, he lit a torch and stepped outside. The ground was silent, but the shadow moved with a life of its own, stretching longer and thicker than any snake he had ever seen. Its black scales shimmered faintly in the torchlight, like oil spilling across water, and its eyes glowed with a cruel, knowing intelligence. Okafor froze, realizing in that instant that the stories, the whispers, and the deaths were not warnings. They were preludes. Days passed, and the terror escalated. The snake appeared without warning, in the market, near his home, even on the road he traveled. It watched him, coiled in impossible positions, always silent, always patient. Villagers spoke of seeing it stretch across the horizon, devouring shadows, swallowing light. Okafor's once confident laughter turned into frantic muttering, his meals untouched, his nights sleepless. He attempted to seek advice from elders, shamans, and even strangers who claimed knowledge of curses, but no incantation, no charm, no plea would stop the serpent. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the trees, in the air itself. He could feel it constricting around his chest, pulling tighter with every passing hour, and deep down, he knew. This was not just vengeance. This was a reckoning. By the seventh night, Okafor no longer slept. He barricaded doors, covered windows, and sprinkled salt in every corner, chanting prayers he barely understood. But the snake was patient. It waited for him to falter. And falter he did when he fell asleep for the first time in a week. He dreamed of Ifeanyi. His pale face, the wide eyes staring from the shallow grave, and a whisper echoing through the dream. Greed is never safe. The earth never forgets. He awoke screaming, drenched in sweat, only to find the massive black shape coiled outside his hut, eyes glinting in the first light of dawn. That morning, the village watched in horror as Okafor stumbled from his hut, muttering confessions to himself, fear etched deep into his face. No one dared approach him, yet all could see the truth. The serpent had come, and it would not release its prey until justice was fully satisfied. Every villager knew the story was about to reach a climax, that the man who had cheated, envied, and murdered would pay a price far greater than gold could ever weigh. The sun had barely risen when Okafor stumbled toward the market, his eyes wide, pupils dilated, hands trembling as though holding invisible flames. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering prayers under their breath, some clutching their children, others clutching machetes they would never use. The market, once bustling with laughter, trade, and barter, felt hollow, a stage set for something unnatural, a scene where fear itself was the main player. Okafor's yams lay untouched on the stall, their golden sheen mocking him like the riches he had stolen, the lives he had destroyed. And then it appeared. At first, it was just a shadow, long and thick, slithering between the stalls with unnatural precision. The merchants froze, their voices caught in their throats. Then, the shadow solidified into a monstrous black serpent, its scales glinting like wet obsidian, eyes burning with an intelligence that chilled even the bravest of hearts. Its tongue flicked, tasting the air, smelling fear, sensing the very beat of Okafor's guilty heart. The crowd scattered in chaos, the sound of screams echoing through the narrow paths of the market as if the earth itself trembled. Okafor's knees buckled. He tried to run, but his legs betrayed him, trembling like newly sprouted stems under a storm. The snake's massive body uncoiled and struck with a speed impossible to follow, wrapping around him like a living, breathing prison. Its grip was slow at first, like the tightening of inevitability, then faster, crushing, relentless. Okafor screamed, a sound that shattered the morning's fragile peace, but no one dared come near. The serpent hissed, a sound that vibrated deep into bones, a voice older than the oldest tree in the village, saying without words that judgment had come. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time seemed to bend under the weight of fear. When the villagers finally dared to approach, the serpent was gone, and Okafor lay in the clearing, broken, bloodied, his ribs crushed, his breath shallow and raspy. Tears streaked his dirt-stained face as he clawed at the earth, begging, pleading, cursing himself. "It's true. It's all true. I killed him. I killed Ifeanyi," he gasped, voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. But there was no mercy, no reprieve. The air seemed to hum with the promise of return, and return it did. By nightfall, Okafor had been dragged again, deep into the forest where no torch dared to burn. The villagers followed only to find his hut in ruins, the door ripped from its hinges, the floor smeared with deep drag marks. Nothing remained but the clothes he had worn, tangled in a tree branch as though the forest itself had claimed him. That night, the wind carried a hiss through the village, a sound that made mothers clutch their children tighter and old men shake their heads in knowing fear. From that day, the story of the serpent became legend. No one in Eziaka ever dared to cheat, envy, or betray again, for they knew. The earth remembers every wrong, and sometimes justice comes with scales and fangs. The village of Eziaka woke to a silence heavier than any storm. Birds did not sing. Goats bleated weakly as if mourning. Even the wind seemed to tiptoe between the huts. People whispered to one another, their voices trembling, recounting the events of the previous night with wide eyes. "Did you see it?" some asked. "The black serpent? The one that took Okafor?" Others shook their heads, unwilling to admit that fear had frozen their tongues. Okafor was gone. His compound, once filled with laughter, the smell of roasted yams, and the chatter of wives and children, was abandoned. The doors hung ajar, swaying on rusted hinges. His yams rotted on the stalls he once tended with greed-driven hands. No one dared enter the forest path where the serpent had dragged him, for even the strongest hunter spoke of seeing the tracks, long, deep, and circling in patterns that made the earth itself seem alive. Mothers held their children close, whispering prayers, while the elders muttered ancient warnings. The spirits of the wronged are not gentle. They do not forget. They do not forgive. Days passed, and the fear that had taken root did not fade. The two men who had carried out Okafor's crime were found lifeless, twisted and unrecognizable, buried in shallow graves not far from the village. Some swore they had seen a shadow of a great serpent slither past the market stalls even during the brightest afternoon. Those who had mocked or envied others now walked carefully, voices hushed, eyes cast downward. And though no one saw the serpent again, the villagers felt it, a presence, cold and patient, waiting, reminding them that justice has a way of arriving, whether through claw, fang, or whisper. Years later, hunters who ventured into the deepest parts of the forest claimed to find Okafor's clothes tangled in tree branches, shredded as though he had been lifted and carried far beyond human reach. They spoke of scales in the underbrush, larger than any snake they had ever seen, black as midnight, eyes glinting gold even in the dark. Parents told their children the story at night, cautioning them against greed, envy, and betrayal. The words echoed across generations. Betrayal has a price, and sometimes it is the serpent that comes to collect it. From that day on, Eziaka remembered. Traders became honest. Families cherished one another. And the wind carried the hiss of the serpent across the palm trees on quiet nights, a haunting reminder that no crime, no matter how cleverly buried, ever goes unpunished. The story lived in the hearts of all who heard it, a tale of fear, justice, and the unforgiving hand of the spirits that watch, always waiting.